Claire Beasley, and I work for the Yurok tribe as a fisheries biologist on the lower Klamath River. Since 2006, the Yurok and Karuk tribes have been working together to conduct the Coho ecology study on the Klamath River. The objectives of this study include documenting use of Klamath River habitats by juvenile coho and using the information to help guide our restoration efforts on the river. Juvenile coho have a very strong affinity for slow velocity habitats. Their need for these types of habitats is much greater than for any other salmonid species. Slow velocity habitats consist of areas with complex wood jams, wetlands, beaver ponds, and off-channel habitats such as side channels and backwater pools. Our study has documented significant use of lower Klamath habitats by juvenile coho that have been produced by spawners from throughout the Klamath Basin. In 2008, we estimated over 3,500 non-natal salmon overwintering in a single wetland down in the lower Klamath. Movement into these habitats is especially prominent during fall and winter, and then again in summer. The movements to reach these habitats can be quite extensive. In some cases, we're finding that juveniles are traveling up to 200 miles in order to rear in habitats of the lower Klamath before heading out to the ocean. Growth and survival are usually greater for coho using these types of habitats relative to coho that have to reside in main channel habitats. Growth of juveniles is very important since ocean survival of Pacific salmonids is positively correlated with the size they are when they hit the ocean. So basically, the bigger you are when you hit the ocean, the more likely you are to come back as an adult to spawn. As we talked about a lot today, simplification of low gradient freshwater habitats has likely had one of the most profound negative impact on coho salmon. In the lower Klamath, land use activities such as agriculture, highway construction, and flood control has also resulted in a severe loss of estuary and coastal wetlands here. And in the photo up in the upper left there, you can see it started way back before the turn of the century even. Most of these estuary and coastal habitats were already destroyed by the 1920s. Many of the tributaries are also now in poor condition due to a severe loss of channel stored wood and complex wood jams. And so our data suggests that the extensive loss of tributary function has likely resulted in a greater percentage of the juvenile coho that are moving out of their natal streams in order to find more suitable habitat elsewhere to overwinter before heading to the ocean. We believe this is the case for a majority of the California coho populations. Therefore, focusing on slow velocity habitats and their protection is likely a key to their survival. So based on our study, we believe that the most rapid and effective way to benefit dwindling coho runs is to improve access and availability of slow velocity habitats in main stem river corridors and low gradient tributary reaches. A related priority recovery action is to work with state resource agencies to increase protection of California beaver populations and their habitats. Based on data collected in the lower Klamath, a single beaver pond can house hundreds, if not thousands, of juvenile coho each year. So this slide just shows two of the off-channel habitats that we constructed with the Yurok tribe in Rocco Fiore in 2010. This winter we documented several hundred natal and non-natal juvenile coho using these constructed habitats as overwinter rearing. Another priority but longer range activity is treatment of low gradient tributary reaches through innovative wood loading and riparian restoration. These are photographs from a recent wood loading project in the Smith River drainage. And I want you to really note the quantity and complexity of the wood that were used and the resulting off-channel habitats that are formed during the winter. You can see there in the lower picture the nice side channels that are forming and the backwater areas that you have associated with these jams. Some people have spent a lot of time saying it over and over that we need to get more large woody debris projects on the ground. We consider that definitely a top priority, but it is kind of longer range in the sense that the ability to gain the quantity and quality of wood necessary to accomplish these efforts is pretty severe. Right now we have about 6 miles that we are funded to do wood loading in, but we scramble each year to get the wood and the quality of wood that are necessary to form these types of habitats. In that last presenter, he showed a slide from Siddell that showed fish use based on the complexity of log jams. And these types of innovative wood loading projects are really the types of projects that we need in order to form and maintain these habitats over the long run. We're actually working with Green Diamond Timber Company this year to actually do a THP where we'll be pushing over whole trees to use in the streams for restoration. So just quickly recapping, we definitely need to dramatically increase the quality and quantity of slow velocity habitats available to juvenile coho. We need to work together to provide more protection for California beaver and their habitats. And these types of actions will immediately benefit multiple populations of coho. Longer range actions include wood loading and tributaries and also restoring our riparian areas. One gentleman, I think, was saying something that we might have a forest population issue. And I might beg to differ, at least in the valley reaches of some of these streams where coho are really trying to make a living. A lot of those areas, we haven't seen a succession back to mature conifer forests. We're either in a desert gravel wasteland or we're just going from alder canopy to alder canopy. And that's not going to cut it. So we really need to be active about restoring these systems. And that means forest restoration and looking to innovative projects such as, the timber harvest unit that we're working with Green Diamond to actually push over whole tree materials.
Thank you. You didn't directly say this, but I draw from what you're saying that at least as far as the coho is concerned, and presumably other migrating fish, the whole river system is connected together. And coho success in the Scott and the Shasta depend on safe places for those fish to finish their rearing in the lower Klamath in order to get out in the ocean and survive and return.
Yeah, coho really, from as soon as they come out of the gravel, that's what they're doing, is they're seeking out these slow velocity habitats, and it persists throughout their freshwater life. And data that we've been collecting on the Klamath River as well as data up in Washington suggests that when you have a really severe loss of that tributary function, that more of these juveniles are deciding to leave their systems and go seek out these habitats somewhere else. So yeah, really.
It's really interrelated. The system depends on.
And thinking about putting them on the landscape in a systematic way so that the fish throughout the basin can use them. But what's interesting is in the off-channel habitat, in this one right in here in Turwer that we just built, we found immediately some of the first residents that showed up were from our best tributary that we have, which is the Crescent City fork of Blue Creek. And so even they're leaving some of the best tributaries known in the lower Klamath to come down and rear in these things.
So we're now realizing that off-channel rearing habitat may be a limiting factor to the coho. Are priorities in our restoration efforts catching up to that realization? I know you showed some examples, but is that...
I think there are some really good movements over the last few years. People are trying to put these back onto the landscape. But it does get difficult. You can't really separate it from the wood loading projects that were done. Really, if we can try to get back to more natural wood recruitment and wood volume and numbers in the creeks, then that would also probably solve a lot of our issues. Coho might likely stay in their natal streams a little bit longer because the habitats are available to them there, as opposed to having to travel 200 miles to go find some place to rear. So I think, it'll be interesting to see what, the panel on the large woody debris folks have to offer today. But for us, we don't have a problem getting the grant money to get these wood loading projects on the ground, but we do have a lot of trouble getting the actual quantity and quality of wood necessary to be effective. Really single and simple log structures are not going to cut it. Logger's choice, dropping a couple logs here and there, not going to cut it.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask Mr. Brock Dolman of the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center to present next.
Well, thank you, Chairman Chesbro, and everyone here today. And I'm happy to be here. And my name is Brock Dolman, and I live in western Sonoma County, and I'm at the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center. I'm a wildlife biologist there, and have been working on fish for the past decade and a half and watershed work. And I think what's become clear to many of us as we struggle with economics and creating. We have totem species of totem salmon, but we need the keystone species back in the mix. And I'm really happy that both Sarah, Sari, and Erica have all front-loaded for me or primed the beaver pump here for me, because that's really what I want to spend my limited amount of time with you. And so this title is Beavers as Affordable Engineers of Off-Channel Functions and Rearing Habitat for Coho Salmon Recovery. And the affordability part is key, and I want to keep coming back to that piece of the puzzle here. Beaver and coho have been coexisting with each other for a long time, and there's a long history of the relationship of beaver being taken out of California. I'd venture to guess it's actually probably the first big driver of colonization of North America in general, and certainly the West Coast was beaver pelts, and we have a long history of that as early as the 1780s, 1790s up to 1805, 1810. The coast was mostly trapped out of river otter, fur seal, and beaver early on. Certainly, what we're finding is increasingly the literature out there, the scientific literature in the West Coast, and a number of studies from Oregon and Washington done by a number of folks, Michael Pollack especially, have positively correlated the relationship between beaver habitat, the various functions that beaver habitat creates, especially the off-stream slow water habitats, the refugia during high flow winter habitats, is highly conducive for coho habitat. And so again, there's a long list of studies out there. We're going to hear more about large woody debris. The beauty of beaver is that they work with all sizes of wood and debris, and they engineer small woody debris into structures that act like large woody debris, and they'll manage it for you 24/7, 365 with no secret review, and they'll do it for free. They're quite amazing in that regard. And what we see in many of the coastal streams is when big flows, the beaver dams will blow out and they'll pop out, and they have a natural relationship of rebuilding them as far as the fish passage question goes. I'm not going to read all of these pieces because some folks have led up to this idea, but what we certainly know is that juvenile coho need this slow water. Beaver create slow water in good pools. We've got a number of studies that verify this. The growth rate piece is really important. The fact that we get more fish and bigger fish, and as was just stated, the bigger the fish is going out, the higher the return rate is on that. And what we find in beaver ponds is you get more food, you get better cover to hide from predators, you have lower metabolic costs because, especially in winter, they have flood protection. They have to spend so much energy fighting floods and getting reamed out of the stream if they've got a place to hide. And there's a greater temperature differential for them. And so in the end, basically, beaver ponds equals more food, more cover, less energy expenditure, which means you get more and bigger fish that head out to the sea, more returning adults, and so basically enhanced coho population is, I think, absolutely dependent on the presence of beaver. Stream flows as well. This is a shot in Lagunitas, but as we've seen, in-stream flows is really critical. And again, a number of studies throughout the West of when you got beaver, you've got better in-stream flow. They slow it, they spread it, they sink it. They slow that water down, they capture it, they reconnect the floodplain, they increase the riparian wetted width, and they let that water seep through and augment base flow late in the season throughout systems. This is a really wonderful shot up on Boise Creek, which is just south of, say, the Orleans area in the mid part of the Klamath. And this is a beaver dam that the beavers put in an exact spot that was planned for a beaver dam. And I like this quote by Tasha McKee of Sanctuary Forest. We've tried everything, yet the salmon are steadily dying out before our eyes. Why not try the beaver? These species have coexisted for millennia before when both were plentiful. And so the folks there at MCWIC, the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council, had a plan and funding proposed to place an artificial beaver structure here so that they could flood this habitat. And then when they went back in the spring, the beaver put the dam there for them and actually flooded twice as much habitat as they predicted. And when they went in to actually look at these areas with all the fisheries biology, it was just loaded with hundreds of thousands of juvenile, both steelhead, coho, and chinook, just littered with fish. It was amazing, and size of quality of fish. And so the idea that Will Harling and the folks there, that restoring coho salmon in the Klamath River one beaver at a time is really the awareness on this. And the Haida people up in the north have a great saying that basically beaver taught salmon how to jump. And there's a long history, and there's the idea that beaver are impacting fish passage when you have stable communities is not correct. A number of us in the California Beaver Working Group have been spending a lot of time to really verify the historical presence of beaver throughout the state. I think there's a lot of misunderstandings, and especially they were trapped out so soon. And with more time, I'd be happy to show you more evidence that we have in the coastal Bay Area, High Sierra, and Southern California areas based on physical evidence, historical accounts, ethnocultural accounts, and geographic place names. And there were just beaver all over the state and in large quantities. In fact, Scott Valley was called Beaver Valley in 1822 and was just full of beaver. And certainly beaver have a way of putting sticks in places that people don't want them to put them, and maybe we have to adapt to that, and there are other ways to manage in a non-lethal form the beaver-human interaction. And a number of folks have put out various publications that working with beavers, beaver solutions folks, beaver deceivers, these various very simple, low-cost, very effective and affordable techniques that allow to maintain beaver ponds, water height elevation without flooding roads or farm fields or blocking up culverts and impacting that. So we have the technology to do that. And they make beautiful habitat. And the thing is in California, the last substantive work we've had in the state is articles or studies from 1946 and 1942, the status of the beaver. And so in sum here, my recommendations would be that basically beaver should be required to be considered in all coho replanting efforts, consideration of beaver and their value, that we promote and support scientific studies of beaver and coho interactions in California, and especially as beaver are a critical recovery tool. And I'm interested in looking at a full analysis of the economic affordability of bringing beaver into the system and also their climate change adaptation and resiliency functions. New Mexico just put out a whole study about climate adaptation at a statewide level using beaver for their watersheds. I would love to request that the California Fish and Game Commission evaluate its existing beaver policies and amend them accordingly to modern scientific principles and understandings, and that I would love to request that the California Department of Fish and Game complete a brand new status of the beaver report that's updated for 2012 and beyond with all the new data, including recovery of coho. And then we educate and promote more the use of non-lethal management practices for existing and all future reintroduced beaver populations, and that we promote the reintroduction of beaver into appropriate habitats based on studies with a special emphasis in critical coho ESU areas. And then finally, we designate beaver as the California freshwater state mammal. And those things I think the legislature could do, and I look forward to working with you on those things. Thank you.
Comments, questions? Mr. Malfa?
Oh, real quick, just save a coho, plant a beaver.
Exactly.
Change the old bumper sticker, but I know we have a lot of donor beavers available in rice country for moving up that way as well. But I like the idea, so we should get our arms around that and see what we can do.
Yeah, and beaver needs, at some level, it needs to be managed, and when their population is at a level where the disturbance and density of beaver is at, we either need to move them to appropriate habitats, or there may be a viable means of managing them in other ways that bring product in. But right now, to be able to trap out a beaver with very little process at all that's performing a whole suite of functions, to me seems almost like it's not clear to me why you don't need a CEQA review to take out a beaver dam that's providing massive offstream habitat for these fish right now. But you can just trap them out, and the level of current regulation on beaver needs significant review.
Seriously, how do you feel about transfer?
I think that based on, we have a number of really excellent folks that we work with nationwide on live trapping of beaver and transplanting and outplanting beaver, and they've got it down about the number, the timing, the season. You got to get the adults and the kids because there's a whole social group piece to this puzzle. Some disease questions that need to be verified, but there are methodologies about how to do this that other states, especially Oregon, Washington, Arizona, New Mexico, Idaho, Montana, have already pioneered this for us, Colorado. So we can link with those people and bring them in to help.
Might not be fair to ask you this question. I might want to ask NIMS or Fish and Game, but what's your perception of why it is that there seems to be a lag in the recognition in our recovery efforts of the evidence that is mounting of the beneficial use of the beavers in recovery for coho?
It's a great question. I think a lot of us who've been involved in the salmonid restoration movement for a long time have kind of wondered why California is kind of the last state in the West to really get on board with this. And there's just this strange legacy of just beaver were vermin and nuisance and just kind of hated them. And we wanted to get access to that. We streamline that channel. We want that floodplain. We want to farm it. We want to put houses on it. Beaver are just a pain in the neck. And there's a legacy issue there that's culturally ingrained. But I think the science is on our side at this point that beaver and coho, and if it's about economics, you've been asked a lot, show me the money. Beaver work cheap, and they're effective. They're really effective.
I'd like to address that a little bit further. It seems that California, I don't know if they're just trying to make their own way or would like to be independent down here, but it's the same as far as, stream restoration. goes to. I think that we're way in the dark ages as far as coho recovery because we just haven't looked up to our friends in Oregon and Washington who have done a lot of research to say that such things as beaver and beaver ponds and also just, making serious log jams, putting those things back into our systems. It doesn't seem like California has really glommed on to what great, resources that we have to our neighbors up north. They've been documenting this exact stuff that we're talking about way back in the 80s or earlier. It's crazy.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Roth?
Thank you. Brock, can beaver be reintroduced in areas where there are denser populations of human species?
Sure, and if you would like to witness that, any of you who take Amtrak down south, just stop at the Martinez station, get out at the Martinez station, just walk 200 yards over to that trapezoidal flood control channel. That's an urban ditch with cement sides, and you'll see a beautiful population of beaver living in that system with a lodge. They've been rearing many generations. They have the beaver the flow devices with the pipe through the dam. They regulate the elevation, and it's the most visited tourist draw to the town of Martinez right now. There'll be 200 people every Friday night sitting there watching beaver at sunset in downtown Martinez along the channel. And so we can do that. We can absolutely do it.
That's the problem with high-speed rail is you would never be going slow enough.
We'll be going too fast to see the beavers.
To see that. So.
Stop and smell the roses. And Mr. Westlow. Oh, okay, he changed his mind.
I'll go ahead and say it that actually we did in the Coho recovery strategy. I was one of the members back then and did promote a chapter on beavers, and it wasn't taken seriously, to be quite frank. And I think now that a lot of people see things differently, but there was a question earlier about how to revisit and upgrade that recovery strategy and update it, and that might be one of the chapters that needs it the most, is having that chapter written and inserted.
We got a lot of eager beavers willing to help you on this damn issue.
Okay, enough beaver metaphors. Thank you all very much. We are now going to move to the forest practices, large woody debris, watershed restoration portion of the agenda, and we're going to start with Gary Reinierson and Mike Janai, Bill Snyder, Richard Ginger, and then Justin Augustine. So Mr. Gary Reinierson will lead the pack here.
He's the leader of the pack. Six chairs, there is.
Have enough chairs for everybody? Yeah. I think so.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Lamalfa and staff members, my name is Gary Reinierson with Green Diamond Resource Company, and thank you for holding this hearing and inviting us to participate. Green Diamond Resource Company has been operating in California since 1947, and we manage approximately 400,000 acres. Most of our lands are pretty close proximity to the coast, and those are in Humboldt, Del Norte, and about 10,000 acres in Trinity County. So we're pretty much a Humboldt, Del Norte, and coastal county company. Some audits present on our property include coho, chinook, steelhead, and cutthroat trout. The picture you see is a picture of the young of the year down in the lower corner there, and a distribution of our lands in those three counties. If you look at the next slide, this appears that we've never met a permit we didn't like. This is a listing of all the. Go to the next slide, or do I have the control? I'm sorry. Thanks. This is a listing of the plans that we operate under: the Northern Spotted Owl Habitat Conservation Plan, the Aquatic Habitat Conservation Plan, and agreement with assurances. This plan, of course, is for the salmonid species. We have a consistency determination also for the coho salmon that we obtained from the Department of Fish and Game in 2008. We also obtained a property-wide 1,600 programmatic permit that tiers off of our Aquatic Habitat Conservation Plan in 2010, and then tiering with that was a programmatic road management plan that you heard Kat Coleman from the Regional Water Quality Control Board talk about. So all these plans build off our aquatic plan and all work basically off of best management practices that all are there to deal with the salmonid species. And we'll talk later about the two key issues that those plans all kind of focus on. Then, of course, unfortunately, we're still dealing with about 50 or 60 timber harvesting plans per year because we really don't in this state yet have a good mechanism for a long-term, broad planning document for timber harvesting. This is a listing of the rivers and their tributaries and some direct streams that provide coho habitat, or are coho habitat. They represent about 115 miles of water course, and that's not including the main channels. I'm segregating out only those segments of those tributaries and those streams that are suitable for coho. And you can see we've got a couple unique streams. Maple Creek and Little River are direct tributaries to the ocean. They don't flow into anything else. They go straight into the ocean. In Maple Creek's case, of course, Big Lagoon, which is occasionally closed by a sandbar. But certainly, as we talked earlier, a lot of the tributaries along the Klamath, Hunter, McGarvey, Apaw, Blue Creek, Serper Creek, Roach Creek, Tectaw, all those creeks that are on the south side of the Klamath. So a lot of different varied habitat for coho within the ownership. Our restoration efforts, we've worked closely with the Yurok tribe, and you heard the representative from the Yurok tribe talk about some of our joint restoration efforts that we've done and some pending ones. Other groups, Fish and Game, Humboldt Fish Action Council, Mitch Farrow's group, Mitch is here in the audience today, RCAA, Redwood National Park, the California Conservation Corps, many others. And also thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the letter trying to clarify the use of those funds for the appropriate location of that funding for salmonids. We appreciate that. The types of restoration that we've been involved in, of course, are direct riparian. We also were looking at a study on riparian, on getting riparian, moving it from hardwood riparian back into conifer riparian, large woody debris, where we actually recruit large woody debris. And you heard a little bit about one pending project. We've also done other projects where we've put large wood, and also the off-channel. The three pictures you see down at the bottom, the first one is a structure in Maple Creek. The second is a picture of that off-channel in Turwa Creek. And then the far right is a picture of some mixed large woody debris also in Turwa Creek. The benefits of the Aquatic Habitat Conservation Plan, the A8CP, the primary thing is the two primary things are the increased riparian buffers. On either side of a fish-bearing creek is 150 feet. So essentially, when you're standing at creek center, plus the channel zone and the channel migration zone, from there out, it's 150 feet on either side. The first 75 feet is essentially unharvested. The second 75 feet, there may be light harvesting and selection. We enter those zones once every rotation. So once every 50 or 60 years, as often as we go into those zones. But essentially, any tree that can recruit to the stream is retained. So that essentially means that near zone, that 75 to almost 100-foot zone on either side of the creek, is essentially left for recruitment and develop large trees. Most of our trees along those zones are 50 to 80 years old now. We have a 50-year habitat conservation plan, meaning that at the end of that plan, those trees are going to be 100 to 130 years of age. So when we talk about development of large wood, that's the primary source where that large wood will be developed. The second is the sediment reduction strategy. First strategy is areas that are so-called loaded or have any risk of sediment entering the water system, that we have identified those, prioritized them, and intend to remove 50% of those within the first 15 years. The second strategy is to not let it get in the creek to start with, and that is put in best management practices that include special treatment areas for the steep streamside slopes, headwall swales, and deep-seated landslides where we have either limited or no harvesting activity on those. Improve road designs, rolling dips, road rocking, et cetera, to protect road. And you can see at the bottom of the picture a newly upgraded road system with rock on it and the new culverts. The picture to the left is removal of fish barriers at road crossings. That used to be a very large culvert that was in fact a fish barrier. That's the South Fork and the North Fork of the Mad River, and is now open to fish habitat. We believe we've gotten almost all of the fish barriers. There's still a few left, but not many. We also have a wet weather operational restrictions on our roads, where we don't operate. We don't start a road operations till the 15th of May and then stop on the 15th of October. Monitoring projects, we do the habitat assessments, populations, the summer juvenile and smolt surveys, and the water quality surveys for turbidity and for temperature. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mike. If you go from at the top, going around clockwise, that's looking at a cross-section. The next one over is they're doing a large wood survey. The next one down is somebody in a wetsuit doing a fish count. The bottom right is a great example of one of our fish traps where we're doing the out migrant surveys. The station where you see the arm swinging out over the water course is actually, that's a full station. We have 12 of those stations on the property that take samples every 10 minutes for turbidity, conductivity, stream temperature, stream flow, etc. Doing a thalweg profile above that, and then of course we don't typically do the carcass surveys, but there's an example of one on the lower left side of that slide. We have 5 out migrant traps that we staff and count the fish on out migrants. So those would be the smolts that are going out, and then 13 summer juvenile population reaches, which represent 31 miles of water course. The result of that is this is looking at the mean summer population of the young of the year, the juveniles. That trend line was statistically located. The 2010, you can see 2 cohorts are down. The preliminary numbers for 2011 shows that line coming back up again. So we're looking at about 1,000 fish on the average with that trend line out at the far right. Based on the 115 miles, if you do the extension of that, that means we have somewhere over 100,000 young of the year on the property during that period of time in the summer. The next chart is the lower South Fork of the Little River. And these are both, the red line is this Coho summer juvenile population. The green line is the Coho smolt population. So you have the fish that just came out of their eggs and are in the system and are starting to rear, versus the lower, the ones that are ready to start to head back out to sea. So when we talk about, we've heard about what are the limiting factors, and we believe in most of our water courses, it isn't the summer habitat, it's the winter habitat. We heard the previous speaker talk about lower velocity water systems and be able to have more of that protective water, and that leads us back to the large woody debris. So we really believe that over time that we see those lines come closer together with the betterment of that large woody debris. The last slide, of course, is what we're all looking for. And there's a nice pair of Coho and Ryan Creek. Ryan Creek's a tributary to the Ryan Slough, which is a saltwater influenced slough, which comes out right in almost downtown Eureka. So we believe the title of this presentation, while it's Coho on the Brink, we believe it actually represents more of a huge opportunity for Coho on the brink of a reasonable comeback. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments at this point?
Quick question here.
From Alpha.
I was looking at your second page here on all the different plans that you get to exercise to either have a timber harvest or just own the property. Are these all applicable to timber harvest, or is some of them just stewardship of the land that you own?
These are collectively allow long-term regulatory, and I hate to use the term regulatory certainty because I'm really not sure that's an honest word.
Relatively speaking.
Or phrase. But what our company's made the decision that we want to have as much certainty as we can going forward. So the first plan, the 1992 plan for the owl, is a 30-year plan. The Habitat Conservation Plan is a 50-year plan. And the consistency determination is tied to that. And then the 2 state permits, the permit for the 1600 permit and the WDR, are also long-term permits that are tied to those other permits. So they allow us to do 2 things. 1, ongoing forest management, and 2, be able to manage those road systems, as well as not only manage our road systems, but to go out and then undertake the repairs, upgrades, and the put-to-bed projects on those roads. Because if we didn't have these permits in place, we'd have to go every single time we went outside a timber harvesting plan to work on a road. It would be a CEQA event. We'd have to get either a mitigated neg deck or an EIR to do it.
And do you feel that's working well? It's specific to the road, since we heard a lot about siltation from roads earlier. Do you feel like this is a workable program for you to achieve that?
Yes, and that's why we went to water quality. We sat down with Kat Coleman and her staff and said, we need to put together a comprehensive plan that allows us to go out and manage these road systems, and to make the repairs, and to put the roads to bed that should be put to bed. And this is a program we came up with. It's a road-specific waste discharge requirement. And it's one that works real well for us because it allows us to then implement our habitat conservation plan properly. Meaning to identify where there's potential sediment sources that could enter water courses, and go fix those.
Tell me about, I heard a while back an update to the part of the owl plan here, and I think it has to do with the number of hoots that you do.
Now, I know the guy from the Siskiyou Farm Bureau said that the owls were the cause of all the fish problems, but but let's not get too far afield from the fish.
No,
okay?
no, I'm not going on that direction. But Aren't there new regulations that you have to go out and actually send people out to hoot at the owls? Is it?
There's new protocols that are in place. That the previous protocols allowed for a 1-year, 6-visit protocol. The new protocols require 6-visit, but a 2-year protocol prior to harvesting, and those become effective starting next year. So if anybody plans to harvest next year, they need to do 6-visit protocol starting this year.
What is in that protocol?
Visiting the site within 0.7 or 1.3 miles, depending on what the habitat looks like, and setting up the various stations and hooting for the owls at those stations 6 times.
Who gets to do the hooting?
Qualified wildlife biologist or other party that's qualified.
Okay.
And he's going to say he really gives a hoot.
I wouldn't go there.
Well, I'm going to try to keep us moving, and I'm going to admonish myself. We're well over an hour behind schedule. I've been sort of letting people go longer than we had said we were going to. So I'll ask the rest of the speakers to try to, as much as possible, stick to the 5 minutes, and hopefully we're out of here by 5. Yeah, I know Janai's going. So you let my colleague here take all the time. But Mr. Janai.
Thank you very much. Because Trout Unlimited was such an incredibly important partner in this, I asked Chuck Bonham to come and speak just in front of me. So I would like Chuck to first cue this up, if we may.
Okay. Mr. Bonham.
Thank you, Mike. My name is Chuck Bonham. I'm California Director for Trout Unlimited, which is the nation's oldest and largest trout, salmon, steelhead conservation organization. Thank you, Chairman and members, for the opportunity to present today. My testimony will identify one reason why I believe hope is alive. In 1998, Trout Unlimited decided to put down the past when it comes to its relationships with the timber industry and look to the future. At that time, we created a project called the North Coast Coho Project. The purpose of this project is to work directly with Mendocino Redwood Company and other private timberland company owners to contemplate, plan, and implement restoration across hundreds of thousands of acres. Why is that important? Scale. At this moment in time, scale matters given the urgency facing the fish. What does scale mean? It means by listening, learning the values and the important needs of the industry, and then moving forward together, a world of restoration possibility can open. 2 metrics to judge the success over the last decade plus. First, Trout Unlimited has raised and then invested in restoration over $9 million of public and the more difficult funding, private match, to fix timberlands in partnership with private timber companies. Second metrics, we are now able to contemplate restoring entire coastal river systems and completing restoration from top to bottom when we develop partnerships with entities that own the majority of those watersheds. It's innovative, it's entrepreneurial, it's the right thing to do. I have a vision. That vision is that by 2040, we have healthy coho populations across Northern California. That's within a generation. I believe that a critical way to get there is bringing into the fold those that live on the land, work the land, and own the land into partnership with those who are seeking to recover the fish. It makes sense. It's the right way to go. 2 recommendations about this vision that you may be able to help. First, please ensure that public funding systems like the Fisheries Restoration Grant Program exist. They are the fuel that drive this collaborative work. Second, at an administrative level, I believe it's possible to achieve programmatic efficiencies in our permitting schemes to address issues like large woody debris and collaborative water management. I'd ask Mr. Janai to take us through a particular watershed and show us what this vision looks like on the ground.
Thanks, Chuck. So Gary already gave you Forestry 101, so I'm going to focus the talk here on a specific project that we did. And this is on Mendocino Redwood property. We also have Humboldt Redwood Company. And on both of these ownerships, and including on the old Simpson Green Diamond property, pretty much all of us are doing these things all the time these days. So we're going to focus on the Hollow Tree watershed. This is in our Rockport tract, the most northern piece of the Mendocino Redwood holding. And this has got quite a long history. All of it work that we've done hand in hand with Trout Unlimited. Starting back in 2003, we began this project of taking subwatersheds within Hollow Tree, dividing it up, doing a very robust road inventory in there, looking at crossings and what needed to be done to eliminate the sediment risk, reopen habitat that had been for many years off limits to fish. A few of the metrics that have occurred, and at the end of the project, which will be next year, we will have spent about $4.2 million. Of that, a little over $1 million came from us, 2.8 out of that grant fund program that Chuck highlighted, and NOAA and other agencies at times have chipped in as well when we've had some big projects. I also want to give credit to the CCC crews who have done most of the in-stream structure construction within this project. From this, over 230,000 cubic yards of soil that were perched and ready to go into these stream systems have now been removed and stabilized. When we're all done, 783 sites have been treated, and 641 of those are stream crossings. That's not to say that each and every one of those was fish blockage, but some were, and some of them also were major sources of continuing sediment into the system, and they will be repaired, along with 125 miles of road being treated, and 58 miles will actually be decommissioned. Now, this is the fun part, is just looking at the before and after pictures. But they have a story to tell. This is very typical on the North Coast. Our fisheries biologists went upstream of that culvert that you see there and identified fish habitat. I know that's a little bit dark, but you can see there's a gentleman standing there, Ed Curti. He's our contractor for this entire project. He's 6 foot tall, and that culvert is at least another 4 feet from the bottom of the channel. It would have been very difficult for fish to get through that. So Ed has spent the last 6 years working up in this drainage, along with a 4-man crew that sometimes expands to a 10-man crew. He's taken on projects just like this of removing these culverts and putting in bridges. You can also see there that there's a large amount of wood that it was pushed in there initially when they put that crossing in. The culvert is a new technology and was added years later. But this was very typical of situations on the North Coast. When that wood comes out, there was another speaker that talked about high quality wood. Those big old growth logs are extremely beneficial for placement back into the system. The problem that we often find is if it isn't specific to this small project, we don't have the opportunity to go take that wood and put it into other systems. The permitting system is impossible to navigate. You heard it many times today, and if there was one recommendation, that would be the one that I would give you, is find a way that we can do this more easily. Another collapse crossing, sediment leaking into the system every winter. So we just pull those apart, pull them back, stabilize them, and remove the dirt out of the system. And today we're actually trying to incorporate more of this wood back into the channels as we pull the sediment out. roads. This is a very typical decommissioning that we'll do. That road was right along a Class 1 stream. That road no longer exists. All the existing pipes that were in there were pulled, and this is what you have the winter following. Then finally, where we have existing roads that we absolutely know we need into the future, we're upgrading them. Slowly but surely eliminating the roads at the bottoms along the streams, or upgrading them and rocking them, and then using older roads instead of building a brand new road to get to areas up on ridge tops where we can then position our equipment for doing the logging that at some point in time we will do in these drainages. This happens to be a very young stand in here. We don't have a lot of plans for harvesting. We've done a little bit of harvesting as we've done this work. Some of the sediment that I gave you the numbers for was also material that was taken out as part of the timber harvest plan process as well. But the largest majority came from those grant programs. So, in conclusion, with a recommendation other than the permitting issues, I would say continued funding of those grant programs and support of that, and working to focus the WCB in their looking at what the high priority programs are that they can contribute to. Very important to continuing to do this. Thank you.
I thank you very much. Appreciate the hopeful tone in a otherwise challenging agenda. Next, I'm going to call on Bill Snyder of CAL FIRE. Been a lot of talk here today about permitting problems.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Snyder with the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. I'm the Deputy Director in charge of the Resource Management Programs. If we get
Side one.
side one, this one.
There you go.
Okay. I think we all recognize that Coho on the brink, and I think as we look at the department program, certainly we have a regulatory function, and one of the steps forward recently, I think, was Board of Forestry adopting a rule package for protection of anadromous salmonids. The other piece that we play a critical role in is looking at how those practices are very site-specific and prescriptive, and they don't fit all situations. So what would make sense from optional perspective in terms of restoration activities? And we deal with those under ASP Rule Section V, which I'll talk about a little bit later. The department also has a role in research and demonstration and providing technical assistance and technical outreach for folks. And we've done that quite extensively with respect to large wood placement on the demonstration state forests. And we also have a role in landowner assistance in terms of helping landowners get work done, including in-stream restoration. And I'll probably talk a little bit more specifically about our wood for salmon, which gets involved with the permitting process. So if we look at the ASP rule goal, it's essentially to improve and retain habitats. There are several key components of this. One is a new geographic scope, divided the range of the Coho and salmonids into two areas, a coastal and inland area. The refinement of Class 1 watercourse and lake protection zone widths and protection measures. Protection for Class 1 floodplains. Added protection for large Class 2s, which drain directly into Class 1 watercourses. Protection for small headwater streams. And incorporation of a site-specific approach to deal with specific activities the landowner might want to undertake within watercourse and lake protection zones. The ASP rules are generally designed to maintain a number of functions in the streams. First, large wood input into fish-bearing streams. That's generally accomplished by retaining large trees in near-stream situations. It doesn't involve putting trees in, but just keeping trees in proximate locations so they will fall in at some point. There's a wood input into headwater streams in terms of retention of channel trees and other valuable components on the landscape. There's enhanced watercourse shading requirements in terms of inner and outer zones, and high levels of canopy retention within those zones. There's sediment filtration provided through buffer zones and equipment exclusion within those zones. Protection nutrient input through retention of trees. maintenance of stream bed and stream bank stability by limiting operations, actually prohibiting operations within the core zones, and a few other things here. But as we look at the rules, we all recognize that not all rules fit every situation, and there will be opportunities within these watercourse and lake protection zones to propose to do something different. So the board basically provided a process wherein a landowner could propose different practices. As that RPF develops those practices, there is a basic requirement that they maintain the goals and the standards of the rules. We have to have concurrence of the Department of Fish and Game and other team agencies. And the rules also call for development of 2 pilot projects, which the department is currently working with a technical advisory committee, and I think is very similar to your Bill 380 in terms of looking at how to get these things put forward. We've identified example potential projects. Placement of large wood in Class 1 streams certainly is something we all agree is a good thing to do. But as Mike points out, putting the wood in the stream triggers a permitting morass that I've just come to appreciate, even being a bureaucrat. But looking at some of these things, there are a lot of opportunities for thinning to increase tree size and growth. There are places for demonstration of wood, and this is some wood projects on Hare Creek, which we did in cooperation with DFG. We put the wood in, they studied how it performed, how it moved. But the problem we face right now is Coho are on the brink, and they are immediately threatened with extinction. And while we can wait for a lot of these rules to put wood in, do we have the time? And I came to the conclusion last year, no, we don't. So what can we do? So we formed an ad hoc group of other bureaucrats to look at what we can do to get wood in the streams. The goals of the group were generally to understand the permitting process. We also wanted to learn from successful projects, wanted to identify roadblocks, develop opportunities, and improve the existing permit system as we could and coordinate permitting. For the purposes here, we focused on the Central Coastie issue, and there are a couple reasons for that, and I gave you a couple maps that show the Central Coastie issue. For the first part, the recovery plan was very helpful in terms of targeting key watersheds that were currently refugia for coho that had existing coho populations. And the second reason was there's a biological opinion that was developed for putting wood into streams that we could take advantage of working through that process with the Army Corps of Engineers. So it gave us an opportunity to get the incidental take permission and incidental take authority that we needed in order to get wood in the creeks. So we've been partnering with the National Marine Fisheries Service, Department of Fish and Game, CGS, Water Quality, CAL FIRE, a number of NGOs and private entities. Solutions that we've looked at to date, I think, we've heard here before, but we want to build upon DFG's Fisheries Restoration Grant Program process through utilization of mini grants. In other words, small grants that get us into the permitting system that would allow us to take advantage of their permit streamlining abilities through that program. We're also looking at developing small habitat restoration permitting processes, taking advantage of existing categorical exemptions within CEQA for these restoration projects, and looking at coordinated and consolidating permitting. If we look at the permits that all the agency require to do the work, they're all very similar in informational requirements and elements. We're looking at trying to consolidate those into a single permit that we can all use to authorize the work. We'd also like to coordinate landowner assistance programs to emphasize restoration work. We have authorities under the California Forest Improvement Program to help fund some of the work. And we can do that in cooperation with Natural Resources Conservation Service and the Forest Service through their state and private forestry programs. The reason this is important, if you look at the one map I gave you, there are a lot of non-industrial timberland owners within the coast who have management plans that are approved, that if we can figure out some way to get them through the permitting process, I'm pretty confident we get wood in the creek. And the other piece we want to focus on is looking at large landowners to develop large woody management plans. And as Mike says, there are a lot of landowners who would like to do this, but just getting the permits done and getting that permitting process conquered is a significant step forward that we can all take to get there. The other thing that we've looked at in terms of remaining challenges is there are some federal permitting processes that are difficult. If we go outside of the Central Coast ESU, we don't have biological opinions and other sorts of things that we can hang our hat on to support this type of work, and we really need to see what we can do to foster creating the same type of system that we have there in the Central Coast ESU. The other piece we need to do is figure out how we can get some of this work done in conjunction with timber harvest plans so that we can get the wood in the creek. Those are both significant challenges at this point in time. We need to basically look at significant permitting information and figure out how to deal with the content hurdles, and I think consolidation of permits are going to be an essential piece because most small landowners aren't going to have the skills or the patience to get through the permitting process that it's going to take to get a piece of wood in the creek. The other piece that we're challenged with is even if we get some of these pieces put together, I think we look at DFG staff, they're already all occupied dealing with their own internal fisheries restoration grant program. So adding a mini grant program to that would add additional projects is going to be a burden that they won't be able to bear without some additional staffing. So we need to find some mechanism we can expand the capacity of either agencies or the capacity of professionals and contractors who work on these. And that's probably over my time.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I want to say we've heard over and over from many different perspectives today, and we're probably going to hear it some more before we're through, about the difficulty in the permitting process for placing the large woody debris and doing these kinds of projects. And but we haven't really had anybody say, here's the permitting process, or here's where the log jams are, so to speak. So I guess my challenge to all the interested parties here is give us some ideas, because I certainly am interested in helping to streamline that process, clear the log jams, if you will, so that we can create some log jams. And I know my colleague to the right here, I'm sure, is probably thinking the same thing.
He's actually chomping at the bit on that one, and so I share your interest in whether it's 1600 or CEQA or whatever.
What is it we need to do?
It is, it's baffling. The folks that wrote Fish and Game Code Section 1600 were trying to protect streams and fisheries. The folks that wrote CEQA were trying to protect the environment. To now have these things be standing in the way of urgent actions that need to be taken is certainly at odds with the intention of those laws, and so I think that gives us an opportunity to find a way to work with it. But I'm hearing a real imperative from this hearing on that subject.
Well, especially with the urgency of the status of the Coho salmon. I mean, that creates an emergency situation that I think gives us added impetus. It's not just generally a good idea; it's an emergency.
And if we can't get it fixed, then my advice is don't ask permission.
It's easier to ask for forgiveness, right?
Okay.
And if I could, I think part of the challenge and part of the thing that we've been struggling with is how to get people together. And I think there is a lot of enthusiasm and support for solving this amongst the agencies. And I think we're going to get there relative to small in-stream restoration projects within the Central Coast. And I think the challenge then will be to move that up to the north into the next ESU.
Mr. Huffman, I believe, has a law degree. I'm certain that he'd be willing to provide some pro bono services defending y'all. So, moving on, we have Mr. Ganger, who's described in the agenda as a watershed advocate, but that hardly begins to describe Mr. Ganger. So,
well, thank you, Chairman. Chairman, Member Huffman, and the rest of the Joint Committee that are probably all tuned in. Yeah, first off, I'd just like to say I've worked with just about everybody here at this table, including Justin, and the way it was summed up, what Trout Unlimited's role was, is really vital, and there needs to be partnerships. But one thing, given that, the general public is generally excluded. And there's a lot of history of skepticism. And my colleagues at EPIC, this is like a little piece of that skepticism, I think. And I'll read this. This is from Andrew J. Orehosky, Conservation Director of the Environmental Protection Information Center. For EPIC, the main message on forest